the GDPR and what it means for you with Greg Dumas. And then after that, we're going to have our DevOps co-chair, Andy Mann, come up and talk about data-driven DevOps. So I'm going to give you like 10 more seconds. Everyone come on in and sit down. We're going to get going. And let's have a hand for Greg.
Okay, Roger, thank you very much. First of all, welcome everyone to CloudEXPO. We're quite pleased to be here, and I'm also very happy to be in an area where I'm not looking at smoke and fires. I actually live in Santa Rosa, and it's been one heck of a month for us, so you can appreciate it when we see blue skies and no flames. But thank goodness things are on the mend up there in Sonoma County. All right, anyway, a little bit about myself. My name is Greg Dumas. I'm actually the Vice President and General Manager for Caligo US. And Caligo is an established international cloud services provider which specializes in both data privacy and also GDPR compliance. And we'll talk a little more about how that applies to you. But before we get going here, just a quick raise of hands. How many folks here actually have any type of customers or employees that are based within the EU? Just a quick raise of hands. Okay. How many folks here are familiar with the General Data Protection Regulation? All right. How many of you are actually doing anything about it? Okay, that's good. That's good. It's amazing. I actually do a roadshow on the topic of GDPR, and you talk to some very large corporations in the United States and some very small ones and some medium-sized ones, and a lot of people aren't even aware what GDPR is. So part of what my job is over the next 25 minutes is to basically get you up to date as to what GDPR, or the General Data Protection Regulation, means, how that can affect you as an organization, what you should and can be doing to make sure you're on track, and then just a little bit about how Caligo can help you do all that. And then we should have enough time for some quick questions. We're also here at the show in booth 409, so certainly come on by and ask any questions after this. So let's talk about what we're going to cover. First of all, as we said, what is the General Data Protection Regulation and why is it so important, particularly to you and your business? You know, how does GDPR affect your organization? And once again, what do you do to comply? So, why the focus on GDPR? Well, obviously, I think society as a general is getting a little tired of worrying about whether or not their data has been breached and then only finding out about that breach maybe weeks, months, maybe even a year later. I think, not to beat a dead horse, but Equifax comes to the mind of almost everyone here. And isn't it ironic that 6 weeks after the breach, you get to find out that potentially your data, your personal information, your crown jewels as an individual may have been compromised? All right, so that's issue number one. What are organizations doing to protect your data that is important to you and your livelihood and your family? What are they doing to protect it? Okay, so at the end of the day, what the European Commission said was, we actually want to get ahead of technology for once. And what that means is we're going to put together a stringent set of rules which allow you as the data consumer to actually effectively have a Bill of Rights. So GDPR is really a declaration of independence for you, the data subject, from the organizations that are holding your data as to what they can and cannot do with it. And that's really important if you think about it. I mean, how many people here are just constantly annoyed at getting different types of spam email, finding out that you signed to opt out of an email service and they're still using your data and you're getting all these wonderful bingo cards in the mail and you're getting all these annoying emails? Well, effectively what GDPR states is if you are a citizen of the EU, whether you're an employee, an individual, a customer, a student at a university, doesn't matter, if you're a resident of the EU, you basically have rights to your data, privacy for your data, and how that data is actually being used and hopefully not abused. The effect on GDPR in the cloud is dramatic, and we're going to talk a little bit about how this applies, because obviously this is CloudEXPO, and what does this have to do with cloud, and we'll talk a little bit more about how GDPR-enabled cloud platforms can help you get to GDPR compliance sooner than later. Interestingly enough, I did a seminar a few weeks ago, and we had people from Washington, D.C. there, and the scuttlebutt was, what is the U.S. government going to do to basically mirror the emphasis of an act like GDPR? And tellingly enough, a lot of the methodology that they're looking at using mirrors GDPR. As we said before, GDPR is not just about security of data, it's what you do with the data and how you present it and how you control it and how you basically process it. So it's obviously something that hopefully our government gets its act together so you have some type of structure. But in the meantime, whether or not you happen to have a data center here or in Topeka, Kansas, or in Kuala Lumpur, or in Canada or Mexico or anywhere in the world, if you fundamentally are holding data of EU citizens, you are effectively liable to comply with GDPR regulations. And that's another common misnomer. There's a lot of people that I talk to on these seminars say, well, yeah, we've got customers and employees in Europe, but all our data is here in the States. It doesn't apply. False. Once again, the reach is if you are holding any data on EU citizens, you need to comply. It doesn't matter if you're a 10-person advertising agency or you're 10 million employee industrial complex, you will need to comply. And we'll talk about the penalties, which are quite substantial under GDPR, which will be enacted in May of 2018 if you don't comply or at least show good intent that you're making progress towards compliant. To that point, I think it's no obvious misnomer to say right now that the EU is not going to do us any favors here in the U.S. given the current political environment, right? We haven't exactly made a lot of friends lately, so to speak. So you can darn well bet that the EU is going to start painting some targets on some organizations' backs if they haven't complied. And as I said earlier, the actual fines that can be levied are substantial. And we'll talk a little more about that in detail. A little bit about us and our approach at Colego. We basically handle complete cradle-to-grave consultancy on giving you gap analysis, mitigation planning, and also having a GDPR-enabled cloud platform. And I'm not here just to press what we do, but at the end of the day, if you're looking to accelerate your progress towards GDPR and you have data in the cloud, then you definitely want to stop by and talk to us later, and we'll talk more about that. Why the need for change? Well, obviously, for most of us here, this is not your grandfather's internet, and I'm one of those grandfathers. I actually started my career out at Bolt, Beranek, and Newman, and by the way, we were the guys that really invented the internet. It wasn't Al Gore. And I actually have had the privilege of growing up with this technology for the last 25 years. In fact, down the road on Lawrence Expressway about 20-some-odd years ago, I was responsible for the first commercial dial-up router called the Telebit NetBlazer. And that was the good old days where you're desperately trying to download email from halfway around the world, and you got that do-do-do-do-do-do, and then it crashed about 20 times. So at the end of the day, obviously, as we all know, the applications and the use of internet it's been compounded exponentially. So there needs to be regulations in place as to how that data is actually handled and how it's being processed. So kudos to the EU for actually being one of the first people to think about putting regulation ahead of technology, which is actually unique for a change. So let's talk a little more about the key elements of GDPR. First of all, enacted last year in April of 2016, enforcement starts in May of 2018. So if you haven't thought about this or you haven't gotten very serious about getting your ducks lined up to make sure you're going to be close to compliance, you better get going because the clock's ticking. Regarding the United Kingdom, even with Brexit, the UK is embracing GDPR. So they're basically saying, okay, yeah, this is a good thing. This is something that we should be following for our data citizens, and we will basically abide by those rules. Regulation, once again, targets personal information. What is that? That can be Social Security numbers, healthcare files. It can be your address. It could be your driver's license. It could be your passport information. It could be how you shop, what you don't buy. Basically encompasses everything you do as a consumer on the internet. All right? So, at the end of the day, this is once again not so much just about security, it's about data privacy and your data privacy. All right. as we said before, this is a declaration of independence, a declaration of rights for data subjects that are using the internet. What it states is, the underlying principle of GDPR is the data is not yours as a data processor or a data controller. The data belongs to the individual of whom you are processing that data for. All right? And we'll talk a little bit about right to be forgotten and right to opt out. But very important, GDPR clearly states that if you have the information of someone and they don't want to be in your data files anymore, you have to get rid of it. Pro bono. It's got to go. Fines. Okay, here's where it really gets interesting. And if you say, I'll let our risk analysis and legal team deal with this, they're not going to touch us. Well, guess what? Fines start roughly at about 10 million euros. They can grow up to 20 million euros or up to 4% of your total turnover as a corporation. That's a lot of money. All right? We work very closely with the EU commissioners on this. Our company is actually based out of Europe. We're based out of the Channel Islands and the Isle of Jersey. And what they're saying is they are looking to probably go after a few small companies in the first month or year or so and make a legal precedent. Once they've done that, then they have basically the right to say, all right, we actually have precedent here. We got XYZ Corporation. We find them. And we're now going to start going after the big fish. And you've certainly seen some recent activity, like in the case of Google, was fined massively. We also have the lawsuit, which occurred with Microsoft in Europe. These guys are looking to play serious hardball. This isn't a joke. And they want to see that you are making a valid attempt at compliance starting in May 2018. So now's the time to get going. Next point. Data subjects have right to compensation. Under GDPR, it's baked in that you do not have to go to court. You do not have to file a class action lawsuit. As a proviso of GDPR, you have the right to be compensated if your data has been abused and has not followed the auspices of GDPR. So what's that mean? Under GDPR, you as an organization have 72 hours to report a data breach. If you don't, you're automatically going to be dishing out some checks. Okay? So that's one of many items under GDPR compliance that you'll need to follow. They don't want this roaming algorithm of, well, we thought we were hacked, we weren't quite sure, and we were concerned about letting the general public know. So, by the way, your data was compromised 6 months ago, and we'll basically give you a free account to LifeLock, and maybe you'll be lucky. All right, not good at all. Information that you hold must be held legally under the laws and regulations of GDPR if you're holding information on EU citizens. Okay, and there's a whole set of documentation under GDPR regulations which defines what is legal use of data. The other thing is there is 3 prongs of the different types of people that handle data under GDPR. First one is the data controller. Data controller is basically the organization that holds that information. Okay, that could be your company, it could be your organization, a not-for-profit, what have you. They're the folks that have basically gathered that information. They're holding it on their disk drives or whatever. The next leg of that 3-legged stool within GDPR is the data processor. Most of you folks here are involved in IT, IT services, analysts, CIOs, DTOs, et cetera. You are the folks that are basically the data processors. You are processing that data which is held by your organization. The third leg of the GDPR trilogy on this here is the data protection officer. The DPO, or the data protection officer, is the person that is going to be responsible for the ongoing upgrade and maintenance of making sure that you are in compliance with what the EU is saying regarding GDPR regulations. So what the DPO is responsible for is very much like an accountant that is going to run regular audits, that's going to make sure that they are completely up to date as to what the latest and greatest regulations are in GDPR, and helping you and assisting you in making sure that you're staying compliant. Now, DPO, for a lot of organizations, can either be a full-time hire, or it can be basically jobbed out as a data protection officer as a service, which is, by the way, something that we offer. those folks have to go through a certification process, and hopefully they have been fully certified under EU standards. All right, so DPO is very important. A recent study said that there's going to be a need for an excess of 70,000 DPOs over the next 24 to 48 months. So this is once again a very serious person that needs to be involved with making sure that you folks are on the right track to be compliant and stay compliant. GDPR is going to be an iterative process. This isn't going to be something like, oh, I took a test, we followed 5 or 6 procedures, bingo, we got it. It's going to be ongoing. So for better or for worse, the protective aspects of GDPR are great, and certainly I'm sure the EU thought they could probably make some business out of this too. Now, aside from that, you also have specific data regulations which are now being enacted and taken into effect in countries like Switzerland, China, Germany, and a lot of those regulations very closely mirror what is going on with the GDPR Act. We said data subjects have rights to their information. They have the right to be forgotten. They have the right to basically have their data restricted if they inform you as such. Jurisdictions, once again, the EU is basically set up to be adequacy rated to comply with GDPR. The United States is not. Now, another important thing to think about is what we call safe harbors, or you could use the term offshore jurisdictions for data. Those are basically areas where they're protected, all right? If the government wants to come in and say, look, we understand your organization had 200 employees that showed up at an anti-government rally. We demand that you give us that information on those data subjects. If that data is basically held in a sovereign data jurisdiction, or as you could call it, an offshore protectorate, they can't gain access to it, all right? It's very similar to the concept of offshore banking. Where you get in trouble in offshore banking is not the fact that you bank offshore, it's when you choose not to declare your taxes, all right? But it's totally legal so long as you report it. Same thing with data in a safe harbor data jurisdiction. So where are safe harbor data jurisdictions? Switzerland, Singapore, the Channel Islands, Bermuda, Canada. Those are examples of countries that if your data is in the cloud and it's basically held in those safe harbor countries, then it's very, very difficult for someone to demand that that data be turned over. You basically say, okay, we'll talk to the governor in the Isle of Guernsey. All right, good luck. And I like to attribute that to what we call the Snowden effect. It's also very important too for data privacy, particularly if you have certain customers that are maybe high-risk individuals. We have one customer which is actually an insurance underwriter, and they underwrite kidnap and ransom insurance policies for high net worth individuals. They don't feel very comfortable with the possibility of someone backtapping their data and getting that information. So fundamentally, they come to Coligo, and we host it for them in the Isle of Guernsey. All right, so something to consider, particularly as you're looking to not only protect your data and comply with GDPR regulations, but how can I also help keep it private and safe for my customers and my employees. Privacy principles, once again, are in GDPR. If you're withholding any information, you're holding any data, and it's not what they consider to be lawful and transparent, you're going to run afoul of GDPR regulations and you're going to get fined. Other thing is the use of that data needs to be minimized, not to be used here willy-nilly or as you see fit. You have to basically get permission from the data subject of whom you're holding that data as to what you can and cannot do with it. So just really quick, GDPR in pictures, we just covered most of this, talking about the actual fines, which are quite specific. The fact that you've got 72 hours as an organization to go ahead and report there's a data breach, very important, because you, as a data subject, want to know, hey, I need to also do something right now if my data has been affected and you're holding it, processing it, and controlling it for me. We spoke about data controllers and data processors. We also spoke about consent. You have to give consent to have a data processor hold your data and also have it controlled and how it's used. Right to be forgotten, as we said before, if you say, hey, Ashbet, I do not want you having my data anymore, it has to go away. Now, obviously, there might be some folks here from financial firms, and there's certain FCC regulations on holding data, particularly for meeting those various types of banking regulations. And that's something that you really want to make sure that you fully understand how that works and doesn't work under GDPR. And as we also said before, you also have to have very broad definitions as to the different types of data, whether they could be genetic, mental, economic, social, what have you. So it's very wide-reaching. It's a very broad brush as to what falls under different types of data and what you do with it or don't do with it. Most important thing, though, underlying concept under GDPR is privacy by design. What's that mean? What that means is moving forward, this regulation is made to affect that your data is going to be kept private. It's not going to be abused. All right, that is, as we said before, is fundamentally a declaration of independence for data subjects from the people that control and process their data. So, what are you going to do? Well, you could go with the good old dodgeball approach to IT. I'm going to dip, duck, dive, maybe keep a low profile. We're a small company. No one's going to notice us. And there's thousands of other companies they'll pick on before me, so I don't have to worry about sweeping under the carpet. Well, as I like to plan in my life, I'd rather plan for the worst and then hope for the best. And what you want to do is make sure that you don't take this approach to GDPR, because sooner or later we'll catch up with you and it can cost your organization a heck of a lot of money. So the logical approach, what you should be doing and what you should be doing now and making sure that you've got qualified staff to help you, is better understand this regulation. All right? A lot of different types of misconceptions about this, and as I said, I speak to the subject quite a bit. And I get people saying, well, we're HIPAA compliant or we're PIA compliant. It's got nothing to do with this. I mean, certain elements of it do apply to this, but it's not compliance with GDPR. All right, so you need to make sure that your organization, top to bottom, from the CEO all the way down to the people in IT, to the risk and the legal folks, have got their arms wrapped around this. All right, this is important stuff. Once again, do we hold any personal information that is going to be affected by GDPR? So one of the things that you can do is go out and make sure you get a gap analysis that will say, okay, well, we're in the clear here, we're maybe on the edge there, and oh, by the way, we're definitely not compliant. We need to tidy that up. All right? So, list of questions. All right. What is the data? Why do we have it? Where is it? Where does it go? Who I share it with, how do we keep it, how do I monitor it, who has access to it, what is our current exposure and risk. So first thing is getting a effective and well-qualified gap analysis. From there, let them go ahead and work with you on a mitigation plan. And then moving forward, what do we want to do, particularly as it pertains to cloud? Do we want to handle this ourselves, or do we want to move it to a platform which is already GDPR enabled? So, sanity check, disclaimer. If this seems like a lot to digest, it is, all right? And once again, the idea is you're not going to fix this overnight, and there's no need to panic if you actually start to get your ducks in order now. All right, now's the time. If you're not looking at this, or if you are, make sure that you've got a full understanding of what needs to be done. And what's interesting about GDPR is it's one of the very few times where legislation regarding the internet and data is way ahead of the technology itself. It's unique, because having been involved with the internet for most of my career, it's like one of those big rubber band balls. You just keep wrapping and wrapping and wrapping and trying to figure out where it starts and where it ends, and a little bit of like the Wild West out there. Well, these are new sheriffs in town to help rein that Wild West of the internet in as it pertains to you and your client's data. So what to do next? As we said before, make sure you run a thorough gap analysis. See how GDPR will affect your organization. Make sure from there you've got a mitigation plan together, get an alignment strategy pulled together, and you may want to consider how running your data on a GDPR-enabled platform with data privacy built in mind can help you accelerate your process towards GDPR compliance. All right, and that's where we come in as a company, as Colego. We've been in business since 2012. Our entire genre has been built around building data private cloud infrastructures. The majority of our data centers are in sovereign or safe harbor data jurisdictions. We also make sure that it's very high touch support and also full understanding of what's involved to get your data to be GDPR compliant. So we not only provide the service, but we also provide the gap analysis, a GDPR Jumpstart program, and we also provide a DPO or data protection officer as a service. So we basically touch all that, and we've been doing this probably longer than anyone else since 2012. So our founder and CEO, Julian Boxer, will be here the rest of this week, built this with this in mind because he saw this coming down the pike a few years ago. Last point, very important, as part of having a DPO, you also want to make sure you've got an EU representative. That's someone which will basically pretty much be your advocate. Typically, it's preferred to have that person on the continent of Europe so they're readily available to go to meetings and also be up to speed and up to date as to the latest and greatest on any type of EU regulations emanating out of Brussels. So, 2 themes to remember as we wrap up here. It's their data, not yours, all right? The days of, hey, I'm sucking in all this data, I'm going to do what I want, let my sales guys and marketeers go wild with it, not use two-step authentication, basically have wide open portals which can be used and abused. Those days are gone under GDPR. And just because you can do that doesn't mean that you should. And that's what GDPR is here to make sure that you as an organization are following those various types of rules and regulations. Our COO tomorrow, Adam Ryan, will actually be speaking tomorrow afternoon, I believe sometime around 3:30, as to the actual applications of GDPR. He's going to talk a lot about case studies. In the case, had Equifax followed even half of the guidelines in GDPR, that incident never would have happened. All right, so it's not only about complying with rules and regulations being dictated by the EU, but it's about what's best for you as an organization, what's best for your client's data. And that's really the whole thought process behind this. And as we said before, one of the very few times where regulation for data is actually ahead of the technology itself. So, just to kind of sum up and wrap up, GDPR, you want to make sure that data privacy is built in mind. You want to make sure you fully understand the process involved to get to where you need to be compliant, that technology also fits that, and that you've got the ability to monitor and stay on top of where you need to be GDPR compliant. As we said before, we discussed how we can help. I encourage all of you to come by. We're at booth 409. We also have a great little social tomorrow night. Come by the booth. We can get you an invite to that. Come have some food and have some drinks with us, and also just learn a little more about how we can help you. But most importantly, this is something that you need to take seriously. It's not someone else's problem, and it's something that really is going to benefit you, your organization, and your customers and your employees. So just to kind of wrap up, one thing that we can offer is we actually have about a 3 to 4 minute free survey that we can run through if any of you folks are responsible or familiar with where you're at regarding compliance for GDPR. Stop by our booth. We've got some handheld tablets. We can run you through a really quick survey to say, okay, you're either a green light or you're an amber light or you're a red light regarding the various elements of what you need to be to become GDPR compliant. So it's been a great audience. Thank you so much for coming this afternoon. Please feel free to stop by booth 409 tonight and the rest of the week. And any questions, I'll be here along with our staff. And have a great rest of the week. Okay, thanks.